Tonight, Rishi Sunak delays the UK's green targets in a pre-election roll of the dice. As the Prime Minister pushes back the ban on petrol and diesel cars and changes the government's plan to phase out boilers, we'll be speaking to the government to ask whether it can still claim to be a green world leader. The home of the car industry is the West Midlands, and motoring bosses are not happy with today's announcement. We'll be asking the region's mayor about where it leaves business. And after one MP told the Politics Hub her constituents would back today's announcements 1,000,000%, we've been to ask them. All that and more with the former Conservative Cabinet Minister Justine Greening and the environmental campaigner Dale Vince, who are here to give their take for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge, we're live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Now, I've covered a few general elections in my time, and today, as Rishi Sunak stood in front of the podium to delay a raft of green policies, well, I hate to say it, but it felt to me like a stump speech. Now, don't worry, I'm not predicting an election, at least not right now. But today felt like the start of the long campaign. And you can see very clearly the ground on which Rishi Sunak wants to fight. So it was a huge day in Westminster, politically, but also in policy terms. Delaying the ban on petrol cars and gas boilers will have some real consequences for the environment and that commitment to reaching net zero by 2050. And for business too, particularly those companies who've invested millions into electric cars. I mean, you can imagine how it's going down with them. But do you know what struck me as perhaps the most mad thing about this story? I genuinely believe that all of this would never have happened if it wasn't for the Uxbridge by-election, when the Conservatives won the seat against the odds because of a backlash against ULEZ, the ultra-low emission zone. And as the Prime Minister scrambles to find his election-winning formula, a butterfly flaps its wings in Uxbridge and causes a hurricane in Westminster. So we'll be debating this throughout the show tonight. But first, this is our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
Rishi Sunak back when he liked showing off his green credentials. Ambitious net zero targets have been at the heart of the Tory agenda for years. Now, as PM, announcing a retreat.
The test should be, do we have the fairest credible path to reach net zero by 2050 in a way that brings people with us? Since I've become Prime Minister, I've examined our plans, and I don't think they meet that test.
The ban on petrol and diesel cars delayed. Phasing out gas boilers watered down. He insisted this is just a new path towards the same goal.
This country is proud to be a world leader in reaching net zero by 2050. But we simply won't achieve it unless we change. We'll now have a more pragmatic, proportionate and realistic approach that eases the burdens on families.
The Prime Minister adamant that nothing has changed.
I think it is absolutely wrong to describe in any way, shape or form what I am doing today as watering down our targets. Our targets remain.
Rishi Sunak saying he's taking decisions in the national interest, not for political reasons. But the promise he made a year ago when he entered number 10 was to lower the political temperature, to restore calm. Yet, as a result of today's gamble, he has industry bosses denouncing him and blue-on-blue anger as Tory MPs worry about another U-turn.
Some Tories delighted by today's announcement, but this, again, is a divided party.
The Prime Minister is well aware that there's a strong section of Conservative MPs who believe that this is absolutely vital for our country, but also for our party. There is huge political downside, I think, if we become seen as a party which is sceptical about the need to decarbonise our economy and the opportunity that it represents.
Rishi Sunak's attacks on short-term thinking are aimed squarely at one man. These were once Boris Johnson's targets. Today, he warned the PM not to lose ambition. For once, Labour agree with him. They would reinstate the pledge to ban new petrol cars by 2030.
We would keep that at 2030 because that's what business has been investing for. That's what business expects. That's how we can meet net zero. But it's also how we can lower the fuel costs for households who have cars.
As the Prime Minister spoke, in New York, world leaders are gathering for the UN Climate Summit, unimpressed with what they've heard.
Well, I think it's unfortunate that he would do that. And I think the people of the United Kingdom largely agree that it's the wrong decision.
Do you have a message for the Prime Minister, sir?
That's for people of the United Kingdom to address, and I certainly disagree with him.
Is it going to set back the course?
Well, he's doing the wrong thing.
A climate consensus in place for many years, today shattered. This, the go-ahead for net zero differences to be at the heart of the election. Sam Coates, Sky News.
Now, we'll have lots more on this story in the show, but I just want to show you these pictures from the Palace of Versailles, where after a day of pageantry and meetings, you can see there King Charles and Queen Camilla meeting the French President, Emmanuel Macron, in Paris. They are going to a state banquet. And we're going to bring you, of course, all of this arrival shots when we have it. You can see there the French President and his wife and the King and Queen there posing for pictures with the French President for that banquet in Versailles. Wonder what he makes of the environmental policies announced by Rishi Sunak today. King Charles, of course, somebody who has been a campaigner on environmental issues, I think it's fair to say. Penny for his thoughts this evening as he meets the French President. Beth, these kind of diplomatic moments, soft power, if you like, are always quite important, aren't they, for the United Kingdom? I'm joined now by Beth Rigby. Just realised I can see her, you can't see her, so I thought I'd just let you know who I'm with. Important soft power moments for the UK.
Absolutely. And I think, as you said, Prince Charles probably has quite strong private views on all of this politically. He is a keen advocate and campaigner and has been for decades about climate change. So I'm sure he has a view. I'm not sure even when he will share it.
Yeah, maybe not. You can see them going inside the building there in Versailles to the state banquet. Guest of honour, King Charles and Queen Camilla there. Not just the Brits who do pageantry well. I can see those soldiers, very impressive. Beth Rigby, our political editor, with us today to discuss a pretty big day in Westminster. What did you make of the Prime Minister's speech?
Well, I think you got it spot on when you said the long campaign, the stump speech. I was thinking when I was watching it, this is the firing gun on a very long election campaign. And in the speech, Rishi Sunak said, this is not about politics. And I was like, this is all about politics. Look, what's going on? Look, the message from Number 10 around that speech and the Prime Minister's decision to water down some of those commitments to get to net zero on the end of the decade, they're insisting that this is all about working families, the cost of living, that this is a ticking time bomb for families. And the Prime Minister wants to say he's on their side. He's also saying, I'm still committed to the bigger picture of it, but we're so far ahead of our competitors that we can dial back the more immediate commitments. So that would be the Number 10 take. You're absolutely right that this is incredibly political with the eye on ULEZ, on the Uxbridge by-election, a surprise win for the Conservatives. They saw a dividing line in politics around green in the economy, around the cost of living, the way it hits people's pockets, and they think that they can take a fight to Labour, right? So that's the sort of the campaigning politics on it. I think there's also within the Conservatives, though, an element of appealing to the base. Liz Truss is a big advocate of these sorts of policies. The right of the party are big advocates of these policies. And when you look at Rishi Sunak, the gap in the polls, there are lapsed Tory voters from 2019. Someone said to me today about 14% of those lapsed Tory voters are now thinking about voting for the Reform Party. So imagine if Rishi Sunak can begin to claw some of them back, he can begin to narrow the polls as we look towards an election in October or May.
And a quick thought on Labour, Beth, because you're talking there about the dividing lines and this could be the battleground, if you like. What are Labour up to on it?
Well, candidly, I was watching some of the speech with a very senior Labour figure who said the last thing we're going to be doing is getting Ed Miliband out to evangelise about climate change. We are not going to go into the fight. So I think that there is a view that the Conservatives are trying to pull them into a battle that they don't want to have. I think that they are not going to be drawn. I think there's also a view that they will spin this as it shows a chaotic government where a Prime Minister is bounced into an announcement because of a leak, and then it looks like he's tacking after what Liz Truss said, and there's a kind of imagined straw man about all of these policies. The boiler policy was a Conservative policy. It was a Boris Johnson policy, and they are sort of imagined bogeymen there about car sharing and charging for meat and extra charges on airfares, where they're not Labour policy. No one's making those policies, but that's why politically it's interesting, because he's trying to get into a fight. I think just finally, also quickly, in terms of where Labour are at, they're going to stick with the 2030 car policy. And the reason that they tell me they're doing that is because of investors, and they want to create certainty for investors. And you saw the political backlash. But this is a Prime Minister 20-plus points behind in the polls. He has to find dividing lines. He has to try and narrow the gap. He's in for the fight of his life. And this is one dividing line that we see at the start of term. And I imagine, Sophie, that you and I are going to be talking about lots more of them as the weeks go on.
It did feel like the start of the campaign. It really did.
It really
it's going to be a long sort of campaign, but it started now. Beth, thank you very much. Great to have you.
It's lovely to be here
this evening. Well, Beth was just talking there about energising the Conservative base. And when this story broke last night, I asked Andrea Jenkins, definitely on that wing of the party, the Conservative MP from Morley and Outwood, if she liked the idea of delaying some of the net zero plans.
God, 1,000,000%. I mean, in my red wall northern seat, they don't buy the net zero. To me, you know, if it's not only the freedom argument, it's the economic argument. To me, people were told what to do in lockdown. We shouldn't tell them how to heat their home, what cars to drive. You know, so as a freedom-loving Conservative, that's, you know, I find that very excellent. But besides that, the economic argument, you know, I don't want to make people poorer. I don't want the working-class voters to have to pay for the middle classes to drive their electric cars, Sophie.
So is she right? Well, our people and politics correspondent Nick Martin went to try and find out.
So this is my combination boiler.
Gordon is into his green technology like solar power, but he says he's not ready to give up his gas boiler just yet. He also happens to have been a plumber for 25 years.
These are the go-to boiler for millions of people, aren't they?
Yeah.
And the government's plan was to phase these out. What was the problem with that and the timescale, do you think?
I think that the problem that they've always had is that it was an unrealistic target, and it sounds great, but it's impractical.
Getting the UK to net zero will require huge changes to how we all live. The Prime Minister says households who'll struggle to make the switch will be exempt from replacing boilers for heat pumps. That's a crucial sweetener for a fifth of households who, with this change, won't need expensive upgrades. Ultimately, international agreements on climate change were always perhaps going to be balanced with the needs of real people and what they can actually afford. The Prime Minister now calculating that going too fast could serve to alienate struggling voters in constituencies like this one. There are now more than 800,000 electric cars in Britain. Sales have boomed since the government committed to ban the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. It looks like motorists will now have another 5 years to hit that expensive target.
Personally, I believe it does need to be pushed further into the future, so the government have got time to put the infrastructure into place, because there isn't enough fast chargers when people are out on the road on a daily basis.
This sort of policy doesn't surprise me, and I feel like it's definitely done as a vote winner rather than done with good conscience, and it's quite symptomatic of constantly changing cabinet and changing prime ministers.
This surprise announcement by the government is certainly a major policy U-turn, but in the eyes of voters, it could recharge the government's flagging popularity. Nick Martin, Sky News, Leeds.
Well, I'm pleased to say that we're joined now live by the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk. Great to have you on the programme today. So what did you make of the Prime Minister's speech? Are you relaxed about this idea that he's delaying some of these targets?
Well, I mean, the first and most important thing, I'm passionate about addressing climate change. It's mission critical that we do it. But what the Prime Minister said front and centre is we have a legal commitment to net zero by 2050 and we will meet it. But also, where we will get to by 2030 is we will reduce our emissions by 68% compared to 1990 levels, which is far more ambitious than the EU, which is around about 55%. We have already decarbonised compared to 1990 levels by around 50%. So we have the strongest record in the G7. So what's important for me is, are we still committed? Yes. Do we have a plan to get there? Yes. But I also accept that if we're going to get there, we've got to take people with us. And if we don't, we risk effectively discrediting something which is critical to the future of humanity.
You know, what I don't get, right, is the Prime Minister says that he's still committed to this 2050 net zero target.
Yeah.
If you know this, if you're going to get there, you have to take some difficult decisions. Some people are going to have to do uncomfortable things, difficult things to do them. Yeah. And so it's completely disingenuous, it feels, to have a speech when you say, look, don't worry, you're not going to have to do any of that difficult stuff, but we're still going to make the target.
And the first thing to say is we have done some difficult stuff and it's delivered results. So we're responsible as a country for around about 1% of global emissions, probably a bit less. As I say, we've reduced ours compared to 1990 levels by 50%.
So what are the difficult decisions that we're going to take?
But if I just say, if you look at China, that's like 27, 28, 29%, and that's trebled. You've made
the point about how our record on this.
So let's come to the specific.
So what are the difficult decisions?
So what the Prime Minister said very clearly is that if, for example, people wanted to get an air source heat pump or ground source heat pump, but particularly air source, that he would be increasing the subsidy by 50%. So what that's doing is moving away, as it were, from stick more to carrot. Because in my constituency, 3 of the wards that I represent are in the bottom decile of income per capita, not just anywhere in Gloucestershire, but anywhere in the United Kingdom. And if we are to say to them, come what may, you will have to pay 5, 10 or 15,000, there is a risk that you bring this whole thing into disrepute. And that in turn, and this is the critical point, imperils our ability to get to net zero. So long as we're going to get there, if the path has got to be credible.
Do you really believe?
Do you know why I do?
Really believe you're going to get there?
Yes. Shall I tell you why I do? No, shall I tell you why I do?
Okay.
This is the country, unlike any other G7 country, that has put it into law, point 1. Point 2, we have the Climate Change Committee that holds the government to account, and yes, says stuff like, you need to improve this or you need to change that. But we are a country that says, if we make that commitment, we will set up the arrangements to hold the government to account. So yes, I do, and I have confidence in this Prime Minister to deliver it.
I just want to play a clip of you. This is a speech you made in 2019 when you were trying to enshrine in law the net zero target.
Yes.
Let's have a little watch of this.
Although this bill was conceived before the Extinction Rebellion protests, those demonstrations were a timely reminder of the growing democratic drumbeat across the generations for the new radicalism that I've spoken about. And this shows the real power of net zero, not just a project of moral necessity, but one of economic renewal too.
I get why you, having made that speech and having the sort of environmental beliefs that you do, why you have to try and convince yourself that you're going to get to 2050.
No, shall I tell you why I'm positive? Right? If I was sitting here and said, you know what, we're going to get there by 2050, our record hasn't been great, then you would have a point. But actually, our record is amazing compared to other countries.
I'm talking about what happens next.
I agree.
The Prime Minister said that he's going to delay the ban on petrol cars. Right. That is a huge policy. Do you back that?
So,
do you back that specific thing?
I back the Prime Minister's route. But here's an important thing.
Delaying the ban on petrol cars?
There's petrol cars, yes, and also the business about air source heat pumps. So air source heat pumps, as you may know, work for some properties, they don't work for other properties. Now, what the Prime Minister is doing is saying that he will increase the subsidy up to £7,500, which is a tough decision because there isn't a load of flush money to do it. So that means that people can, in appropriate circumstances, do it. But I know that there are some of my constituents who it will never be possible to put an air source heat pump in there because it simply won't work. In those circumstances, are we to say to them, well, you're going to have to do it come what may. You're going to have to spend the 5, 10, 15,000 pounds, and they may not have that money. And the thing that worries me is if you look at whether it's Just Stop Oil or others, fine, I understand the principle, but if you toxify it, if you discredit this critical campaign, you won't take the British people with us. And if you don't take the people with us, we won't deliver on our targets.
The car industry is pretty unhappy with all this chopping and changing. They were gearing up for a 2030 ban on petrol and diesel vehicles. That's been kicked down the road. I just want to read you what Ford have said today. Our business needs three things from the UK government: ambition, commitment and consistency. A relaxation of 2030 would undermine all three. I mean, they've invested 430 million in this. You can see why they're upset.
They have. The thing to bear in mind, of course, is so 2035, that doesn't just put us as a laggard, as it were. That's the same as France, Germany, Italy,
you're making
Canada.
all these international comparisons. I'm asking you,
but there's reasonable points to make.
These businesses have committed hundreds of millions of pounds on a government policy that's now been changed. You can understand why they're frustrated.
Well, look, as I say, this moves us into the pack. So they will, of course, make these investments, but they'll be making investments across the European market, across the G7.
So they're just whining them.
No, I wouldn't. Of course, I don't use that expression. But what I'm saying is that the UK's position, we have been so far out ahead of other nations, and we are still out ahead of other nations, both in terms of ambition and achievement. But all this means is that we're then, so far as that the car point, we're closer to the pack. That's all it means.
Now, in the speech, Rishi Sunak also said that he'd blocked plans to tax meat, introduce compulsory car sharing and make people sort their rubbish into 7 bins. Can you remind me when these things were actually going to happen? Because, I mean, maybe I've got amnesia. I can't remember any of these.
All right, well, listen, I'm Justice Secretary, as you know, but I think I don't know precisely who has said these things.
7
what I do
bins? I mean, what would you even put in 7 bins?
What I can say...
meat tax?
What I can say is that I think the Climate Change Committee has been making certain suggestions about how we...
Have you also blocked plans to, like, ban people from eating ice cream for dessert as well? It's like, what...
Look, I don't know specifically who said it, but what I can say is that Climate Change Committee have made certain suggestions, and I think, from memory, they've said certain things about how you should approach dairy and
these
meat.
These are very different. If somebody has made suggestions, Rishi Sunak said he blocked these measures coming into
Sophie,
law.
I think what he's saying...
It's not.
Can I... The really important point that he's saying is that we will do this in a way which takes the people with us, OK? And all I am saying is that I think there is a danger that people don't realise how far we've come as a nation, how far we are ahead of other nations. Let me just give you one thing today. If any of your viewers now were to go on their phones and they were to look at the national grid for the UK, and they would say, on this day, could be this day, what percentage of our electricity was generated from fossil fuels? Do you know what it is? It was around 12%. So meanwhile, of about 3.5 gigawatts that was produced from coal and gas, about 17 gigawatts was produced from offshore wind. We have more offshore wind installed in this country than any country on the planet apart from China. More than Germany, more than France, Italy, the United States. We have done incredible things over the last 10 years or so, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. We are way ahead of other nations.
Now, I do want to talk to you about one other story on your brief that's been revealed today. John Venables, who, of course, killed the 2-year-old James Bulger, has been granted a parole hearing in November. He was sent back to prison for having child abuse images on his computer. Should he be allowed out?
Well, look, this is an appalling case. It's one that is seared on the memory of a nation and, frankly, on all of us. And I remember it when it happened, and it lives with us. So there is a process, and I have the opportunity to make representations. There is a process which means that I can make representations based upon the information that comes to me. I have to act properly, but I can say this to you and your viewers: I will do everything I properly can to ensure that justice is done in the way that the British people would understand. So I will do everything I properly can. I will, of course, remain within the law at all times.
But by the sound of it, you will be writing to the parole board?
I will be doing everything. See, the only hesitation is I have to look at the evidence that comes to me shortly before, so I can't prejudge that. So once I receive that, you can be assured it will be getting my personal and very close attention, and I will be doing everything I properly can.
OK. Thank you very much for being on the programme today. Good to have you on the Politics Hub. Coming up next on the programme today, Rishi Sunak's speech on a change of direction for eco-policy has opened up some clear green water with Labour. So is it a price worth paying? We're going to be debating with Dale Vince and Justin Greening next.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
There is now a mandatory evacuation for this street. For many people, Harvey is far from over. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque.
We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis.
I've reported from around the world and around the UK.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Joe Biden knows the celebrations are over, and this is a country in crisis. It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next.
Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground.
How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again?
Well, just before the break, we were speaking to the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk. We can bring in a duo tonight, the former Cabinet Minister, Justine Greening. She was Education and Transport Secretary, and also Dale Vince, the founder of Ecotricity, a prominent supporter of the Labour Party, and also the Just Stop Oil environmental campaign group. Good to have you both with us. Justine, to you first. What did you make of the Prime Minister's speech?
Well, I think when you listen to the speech, you got a very different message, in a sense, from the headlines. So the headlines were about him ditching various environmental targets, and there is, of course, some of that in it. But the speech itself was trying to be very measured and absolutely sticking with those core environmental targets. I think, for me, the big issue is business and investment, and the fact that a lot was made of the progress that's been made over the last 10 years, but part of what underpinned that was a more stable investment climate for renewables and investment, whether it's solar, whether it's offshore. And the reality is it's got to be a concern, surely, to government that you have some of those key investors now, the car companies, expressing real concern about whether there's the stability there for them to keep investing on electric cars and that crucial transition for everyone.
Is it pretty obvious that the Conservatives are trying to open up a dividing line with, I guess, people like yourself, right? Environmental campaigners, they think that this is something that they can win votes on.
You know what, I don't think it is people like myself. I think it's more the general public. I think it's people that are struggling with the cost of living and are willing to believe that it's a green agenda that's adding to the cost of living. And this is the key false narrative of the Conservatives right now that we've seen in this speech, that these measures will save money and help lower the cost of living. They won't do that. And actually, there's only one policy, as far as I can see, that's being changed, and that's the Conservative policy, and everything else were, well, some of it just made up. Where's the meat tax, the flight tax, the 7-bin policy? Where is all of that? None of that exists. And so, I think Rishi Sunak today is like, to me, the Wizard of Oz. He sat behind this big curtain, and he's trying to dazzle everybody with smoke and mirrors, because we don't even need to struggle to take the public with us. They're with us. And these measures will save us money immediately in the short term. So what he says that he's planning for the long term, not the short term, that's the exact opposite. This is about the next 6 to 12 months.
We're going to have a lots more debate, I think, from both of you on these issues. Perfect panel to do this. So really good to have you on. Now, I was thinking the most problematic voice today for the Prime Minister wasn't environmental campaigners like Dale Vince, sorry, Dale. It wasn't even grumpy Conservatives who support the drive to net zero. In many ways, it was the car industry, because there were some pretty scathing statements coming out from businesses who have invested heavily in electric vehicles.
You would hope in this country, in a period where we're trying to increase productivity, get more investment into the country, that actually we are more ambitious and want to kind of really create that environment where infrastructure is being built and there's more certainty. And the more things which change around us, the less certainty there is. And it's just very disappointing.
Well, the Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, joins us now from Birmingham. Thank you so much for being with us. I've been looking forward to interviewing you on this because I'm not sure what your position is going to be. What did you make of the Prime Minister's speech?
So I actually think what Justine said was wise. So there were two things to take away from the Prime Minister's speech, and, you know, both sides of the debate have characterised it one way or the other, and it's not that simple. He was absolutely clear that he was committed to the net zero target. That remains. And for me, as someone who has always believed that this issue of climate change is the most defining issue of our time, and I've staked my mayoralty on the fact that we are going to lead in the West Midlands on a new green economy, it was really, really important to hear that. Then the second part of the speech was about measures he was changing. And you know what? It is fair to say, let's look at how we're going to do this, even if the target stands. And I'll be straight with you, I don't agree with what has been said about the electric vehicle date, but I do think some of the other things where the technology has not moved as fast, for example, about domestic heating, they were very fair judgments.
Let's unpick the car debate, shall we? Because I know this is something that has a huge impact in the area that you represent, right? A big car industry area in the West Midlands. And Ford today saying a relaxation of the 2030 target would undermine the ambition, commitment and consistency that they need from the government. I mean, you get this, you're a former boss of John Lewis. How difficult is this chopping and changing for business?
So it is difficult, and I understand why Ford said what they did, because what all the car companies have done over the last few years since the previous government gave its target was they've worked their business plans out. They've decided on the rate at which the sort of adoption of electric vehicles is going to happen, so then they know what production they've got to plan for, and these are long cycles. And then to have a change in the rate of adoption is going to be difficult for them. But the thing that really sort of strikes me about this is now of incredible success for the UK. We've just celebrated huge investment into the UK over the Tata battery factory. We've got record inward investment in the West Midlands, a lot of it about green tech, and the market needs to remain confident in what we're doing.
So why are they doing it then?
They're doing it, you must say, in a sense, I'm the last person to answer there because I've said I would not have done this, but they genuinely think that there is a cost to this. I would challenge that actually, because in fact, these new industries are what are going to create the jobs of the future. We are seeing literally tens of thousands of jobs potential in this new sector. They're good, high-paying jobs, and the R&D that we've got is really supporting that. So there's a very different way of thinking about these are new parts of our economy, great successes, will employ people well in the future, and nowhere more so than in the West Midlands.
You said that you were pleased that the commitment to get to net zero by 2050 is going to remain. But I guess I have to ask, is Rishi Sunak being a bit disingenuous here? Because you can just say it's going to happen, but if you want to get there, you've got to take the steps, haven't you? I mean, he's supposed to be the Prime Minister who's levelling with the British people. It doesn't really seem that straight, does it?
Yeah. But there are many other things he said today that give you confidence. What he said about renewables is true. We've made vast progress. He has come to the decision about onshore wind. What he's talked about, grid connection to the electrification of industry, that is true. So there were other elements of it that actually give you confidence. And when you look at our trajectory, it's not necessarily on target. Nowhere in the world is completely on target, but it is definitely world leading. And he said we would continue to be world leading. And the responsibility of everyone is to examine exactly the detail of how that is going to be done.
I just want to talk to you a little bit while I have you about high-speed rail as well, because this is something else, another area where some people feel the Prime Minister hasn't really been consistent on. We know, of course, the rail link's supposed to linking up London, Birmingham, of course, an area that you represent, and then areas in the north of England. And the Prime Minister's just not being straight on whether or not that's going to happen. Are you a bit worried?
I'm worried because I've been utterly consistent over this. Sophie, as you know, we've talked about it before. I'm a huge believer that this railway line is an investment probably for the next 100 years. It's a core piece of infrastructure, and Britain needs to demonstrate it can deliver this infrastructure, which of course is designed to drive the economies of the Midlands and the North. And again, the government needs to be really clear in its signal to the market. We've already seen lots of investment across the West Midlands on the promise of this coming. Now, of course, we will still get our London-Birmingham link, but we equally need the link between Birmingham and the northern cities as well. Lots of governments have looked at the business case repeatedly, and it has always come through. So I am determined and confident that once again, it will come through correctly.
You're confident it's going to happen? Really? Really?
I am confident that the case is sound, and I believe that when it's examined, the case will win through.
OK, well, we'll find out at some point, I'm sure. And it's really interesting to talk to you, as always. Thank you for coming on the Politics Hub.
Thank you, Sophie. Bye-bye.
Coming up next on the programme tonight, figures showed a surprise slowdown in inflation, a blip or the beginning of the end of the peak. Are prices finally coming under control? Hello, welcome back. Now, this show shares a name with our digital politics hub, which I'm in front of right now. It's a bit like our kind of giant on-set iPhone. And as you can see, we've been across all of today's political developments away from the Prime Minister's speech on green policies that we've been covering on the show. So there's been a big economic story today. Here we go. Amanda Acas, our political correspondent, across this one. And it's welcome news for the Prime Minister, which ironically has blasted off the news agenda with his own speech on net zero. And that is the surprise drop in inflation revealed today. So you can see Amanda's analysis here that includes the prospect of an end to interest rate rises as the inflation crisis starts to ease. The Bank of England is going to be making a decision about rates tomorrow, and we're going to have full coverage of that on the Politics Hub. Also, good opportunity for me to have a look at this, our Rishi Sunak pledge tracker. Now, remember those 5 pledges the PM made? Well, look, on our pledge tracker, you can check out on his progress on that. It includes a promise to halve inflation by the end of year. Now, you can have a play with that on the Politics Hub. It's not doing too badly on that one, actually. You can see it's coming down the target, that dotted line there. So if you scan the QR code, you can also catch up on all of the latest on the Hub throughout the day. Right, let's have a bit more of a chat with Justine and Dale, shall we? I can see you're probably both itching to get a bit more off your chest about the green agenda today. Dale, is this a dividing line that you welcome? You're a supporter of the Labour Party. Do you think this is something that's going to benefit from the Labour Party, or do you think that actually there's a bit of an elephant trap here?
I think it's potentially a mistake for the Conservatives. It's absolutely a mistake for our country, because what he's committing us to is higher bills and a higher cost of living. We know that it's a fact.
Because that's the opposite of what he says, right? He says this is about helping people who are struggling with the cost of living, spreading out these targets to try and make it more affordable.
I know, that's so galling for him to say that, but that's what he does. He talks about what he's doing in the exact opposite terms to what he's really doing. He says this is for the long term, not the short term. This isn't politics, but this is politics. The OBR told the government a couple of weeks ago that it would cost twice as much to stick with fossil fuels as to move to green energy, for example. We know every pound we spend on fossil fuels, we can get 2.5 times as many jobs and twice as much economic growth if we spend it instead on green energy. And so this false narrative that we can save hard-pressed people money by moving away from the green agenda is just utterly false.
Are there specific examples, though? For example, people who have to drive into London, pay the ULEZ, because they have vehicles that they just don't have the money to quickly get rid of and upgrade to an expensive electric car?
Hard for me to know, but this isn't about the ULEZ, this is about new car sales, and it's a fact that 80% of all car sales every year are second-hand, and hard-pressed people don't run around buying new cars. This isn't saving hard-pressed people money, pushing back this target for 5 years. It will undermine confidence of business in Britain, and at the same time do nothing really to reduce the cost for motorists. In fact, according to figures from the Climate Change Committee, it will add £10 billion in that period to the cost of fuel for motorists, and it will reduce the number of second-hand electric vehicles on the market that otherwise find the way into the hands of hard-pressed people, and the running cost of electric cars is thousands of pounds a year less than fossil fuel cars. And by the way, by 2030, the motor industry expects to reach price parities that electric cars cost the same as fossil fuel cars, but cost far less to run. So there was no problem or penalty here for the British people.
Justin, I'm interested in your view on this, because we've heard Dale's view, we've also heard Alex Chalk's view. Two people who both say they believe in reaching net zero, but they disagree on the way that we get there. Who do you back on this?
See, I'm not sure there is actually huge disagreement. I think we'd all agree that when it comes to making that transition, there are some people for whom it's going to be really unaffordable, and we need to have some proper support to help them be part of that transition. And to my mind, it's about creating a sensible investment climate for business, whether it's investment on climate, whether it's investment in skills and social mobility, is something I campaign on. Business just wants to know what good looks like and then have a proper platform itself to be able to do the transition, as well as the one that we need in place for people. I think one thing that was missing, possibly from my perspective from today's speech, was what about the super emitters? So yes, we absolutely should be fair to ordinary families who have a carbon footprint that is actually minimal. Yet when you look at emissions, Sunak talked about aviation, 50% of aircraft emissions come from 1% of people who are flying. So I think if we are going to have a targeted approach that provides support for people who find it the least affordable, I think also probably it's time to have a discussion and debate about how we actually have a fairer approach for there's a cohort of people who really are creating a big footprint.
So what would you do on that then? Would you say, you can only take X number of flights a year and then you have to pay more tax on it? What sort of thing would you look at?
I think it's about starting to have a more comprehensive approach. That's the point I'm making, Sophie, is that if we are going to open this up to talk about how we make a transition plan for everyone, then everyone does need to be part of it. And if delaying to 2035 means that people can buy really expensive petrol-emitting vehicles that continue to pump out pollution around London because it doesn't matter to them because they can just pay the ULEZ any day of the week. I don't think that's actually what any of us really want to see. So it's about having a measured approach, but above all, what we've learnt in climate is that it's fundamentally often the private sector and investment by the private sector that's going to help do that transition. So I think the government will need to revisit those concerns of major investors on this next phase of delivering lower emissions and really work with them to make sure that we've got a collective plan. The chopping and changing, I think, is really damaging, and therefore this is about more stability. But I think if you're going to avoid chopping and changing, we've got an election next year. This is a very political speech. I agree with both you and Beth. This is the firing gun.
Felt like it, didn't it?
What we need actually, rather than wedge issues, is consensus. So come
on, you've been in politics long enough to know that's not going to happen.
But the problem I think is if there isn't even consensus in the Conservative Party on the steps today, then that takes you further away from having that stable investment climate that a wider Britain needs if it's actually going to help navigate through this.
I thought it was quite interesting listening to what Beth said when she watched the speech with a senior member in the Labour Party, and they said, look, we're not going to get Ed Miliband out there being evangelical about climate change. What did you think of that when she said that?
I can understand it, really, because I think there's a danger of walking into a trap, this false narrative that the Conservatives are setting up, that it's a choice between green or cheap. That's absolutely false. And all of the talk of net zero is making net zero sound like a bad thing, like all of the talk of Europe we had for 20 years when, the right-wing media, excuse me, hammered Europe for that period of time leading up to the Brexit referendum. And really, we shouldn't be talking about net zero. We should be talking about the green economy. I don't know who it was that said this, but the massive opportunities of the green economy are the thing that we should be talking about. Oh, it was Andy Street. The jobs we can create, the real economic growth that we can create, and it's sustainable growth as well. The facts and figures are clear, and Rishi Sunak today walked away from them.
Thank you very much for, I have to say, a lot of agreement on the panel tonight, it feels like, on this issue. We'll have more from you after the break. Still to come on the Politics Hub this evening. In the G20 earlier this month, the Prime Minister did promise he would attend COP after missing the climate summit last year. But he also said that net zero shouldn't be a hair shirt, hardly a full-throated declaration in front of world leaders to tackle climate change. So what does the Prime Minister's position do to Britain's place in the world? We'll debate that next.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is hardcore emergency medicine in the hardest of circumstances.
So you'll be doing brain surgery today? Maybe.
Here, the resistance lives or dies.
It's been quite remarkable. You have to see these things, but it banking hurts when you do it.
Well, it's kind of a way to fundraise for our charity, and we thought it was a really creative way to fundraise. And basically, we've got 60 of the world's best playwrights who have annotated scripts, first edition scripts, and they've put in their thoughts, their feelings, their memories, and it's really, really exciting. They've gone back to them and written them especially, so they've taken a couple of hours of their time and they've sort of thought about why they wrote the script, what special lines meant to them, what their favourite lines are. So it's really interesting. We were reading through them, and some of them are quite moving and some of them are really funny. And well, Jez Butterworth's annotated script of Jerusalem was one of my favourites because he not only annotated it, but he stuck in some props from the original production. So you've got like fake money in there and some fake cocaine in there and some lighter that Mark Rylance used. So it's really interesting. So that was one of my favourites. It's a piece of history. It's never been done before. So people who are into theatre or just anyone who likes those films or those plays, it's like having a piece of history in your living room.
So tell us about the work. Where will the proceeds of this auction go to?
They go to Good Chance Theatre. We're a theatre company who work with refugee artists, and we were founded in 2015 in the Calais Jungle Refugee and Migrant Camp.
And where are you based now?
We're based in London, but we work all over the world. with artists from all over the world.
Fantastic. And when's the auction?
It's happening right now, so you could bid on it right now. And it finishes on the 6th of October.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, we've been looking at the net zero debate through the prism of UK politics and the UK economy. But this issue, of course, by definition, has an inescapable global dimension too. And the dilemma for the UK about how fast and how far we should go compared to other countries has been present from the start. Margaret Thatcher made a landmark speech to the UN in 1989 where she set out the arguments for the UK to lead the way.
We need to get the economics right. That means, first, we must have continued economic growth in order to generate the wealth required to pay for the protection of the environment. But it must be growth which doesn't plunder the planet today and leave our children to deal with the consequences tomorrow. We need a realistic programme of action and an equally realistic timetable. Each country has to contribute, and those countries who are industrialised must contribute more to help those who are not.
All right, let's talk to Justine and Dale, shall we? Where do you think Margaret Thatcher would be in the debate today, then?
I think she would have wanted to see a much stronger long-term plan, actually. And of course, she was completely right, literally decades ago, about the need to take action on this. And I think Britain should be continuing to lead on this agenda. You know, we've always been a country that's taken the world's priorities and made them ours and tried to show leadership. And so I don't think we really want to be in the pack, do we? I think we want to be ahead of it. You know, I do so much campaigning on social mobility. Part of what drives me is I think we should be a country that's showing how you can achieve equality of opportunity, even when your heritage is that you're very... I think we should be taking these big issues of planet and people and being right at the front of the leading pack. And so I do think today's speech just makes that harder. I think it had some very mixed messages for people. Maybe that was the intention, but I think the way it will be taken externally is almost inevitably going to be a lessening of the British ambition on climate change.
Do you think, you know, we heard Alex Chalk there saying, look, we're doing really well in comparison to other countries. I mean, does he have a point?
In a way he does, but it's a presentation of statistics. So we had a dash for gas in the 90s. We switched off our coal. We moved to a cleaner fuel, which is gas. And the bulk of those emissions reductions just come from a change of fuel mix. They haven't come from green energy. We do have 40% green electricity on the grid right now. But if you look at the Climate Change Committee reports, they're very clear. We've got a 1% reduction per year at the moment. We need 4. So we're doing a quarter of what we need to do. We will miss our 2050 target. That's unarguable right now. And today's announcement is a weakening of that, which will only increase the gap by which we miss our target. But I just want to say this. I mean, I like what Justin said there. And I think a point worth making is that the environment used to be a moral issue that we had to pay for. And then you had the economy, and the colour of both is green. We have a perfect overlap and alignment right now where the environment and the economy are the same thing. We don't have to focus on the climate issue as a reason to pursue the green economy. It's good for our country, for jobs and all them things.
And in so many parts of the country as well, those jobs going to communities that really need them. So if you look at investment that's going into Teesside or in the Humber region, you know, these are investments that are absolutely transforming not just the short but long-term prospects of communities. And so, you know, I go back to everything I'm doing. I'm almost getting companies to retrofit their opportunities into new talent pools of maybe more disadvantaged communities than they've accessed talent from in the past, Of course, for new sectors, the new green economy, we can get those opportunities into those communities from the word go. So this is a win-win for these two big challenges Britain faces if we get it right.
We're nearly out of time, but I did just want to talk to you a little bit about what we were discussing at the beginning of the programme. It feels like this is the start of the long election campaign, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It really did to me.
Yeah.
You're going to be on a few leaflets, I bet. Conservative leaflets, don't you think?
Yeah, arch eco-zealot villain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Labour Party, Dalvins, Just Stop Oil, you can see it.
But my message is not about the climate. I've been campaigning now for a couple of years about the economic opportunity of this green economy agenda. And, I've been in business now for 30 years and, I formed the world's first green energy company. I know how this works. And this is a massive opportunity for us.
It's the election campaign, isn't it?
It's going to feel like a long, long run-in, I think, for voters. And I woke up today and was, listening to the news thinking, oh, this is going to be quite heavy going. I think what both parties really need to do is to shift on much more positive territory and start talking about aspiration, where they want Britain to go. I think, yes, of course, we have challenges. Yes, of course, they need solutions. But I think people also want to hear from both main parties about what this message of hope is and a credible message for how we're going to navigate what's been an incredibly challenging time but come out on the other side fairer and better.
Do the Conservatives have a chance?
There's always a chance, actually, because there's such a long time to go potentially before the election, so anything can happen. But I think, it's up to the government to make its own luck. And I think it's got to do more than just play identity politics, because, of course, the risk, Sophie, is that not enough people feel they share the identity.
Would you put money on a Labour win? Or
I would say the government is making its own luck with the boundary changes, with the new rules to prevent people from voting. Young people in particular, they're already changing the playing field. Would I put money on Labour? I'm not into gambling, so I couldn't say yes to that.
There you go. Nicely dodged. Good to have you both on the panel tonight. Interesting discussion. Well, that is all for tonight's big news day here in Westminster. And remember, of course, you can scan the QR code and catch up with all of the latest on the Hub throughout the day. I really think we'll look back on today as the day the campaign started in earnest. Good night. See you tomorrow.